I'd like to welcome you to our next teaching, our dissertation, in the name of Yad Hivahi, Aramaic for the name of our Father. And of course, Yahweh in English. I'd like to welcome you to our next teaching. I'd like to introduce to you our teacher, Teacher Ray Bunzow, who will be conducting this study. I would like to state at this time, before we get into it, that Teacher Bunzow has done a tremendous amount of research in the old books, or what we call the ancient books. And it isn't directly what he says, it's what he brings out of these books, what is hidden in these books, that has been hidden from the people of their true meaning and what the meanings are and how they're put together. And this is why at this time I want to take the pleasure of introducing him, because he has done a tremendous job. A lot of effort in doing this work. It's a tedious job, but it's a fulfilling job. And I want you to understand that the researcher always learns more than the students, because they're the ones who put it together. Right. So without any delay, I'd like to introduce to you Teacher Ray Bunzow.
Praise Yahweh.
Praise Yahweh.
Thank you, Dr. James. That was kind of you. I'm here today to proclaim Yahweh's name to Yahweh's people. See, remember, put this right in the front of your thinking. Many are called, few are chosen, and even the elect are few. The elect, that's the church, the ecclesia, the church, not the building. I'd like to take you into some research that I've done here as of late. And I can only bring a small bit of documentation here. But we're going to start out in Numbers chapter 1 shortly. It's an amazing how the things, the history, the times and events have been twisted, changed, and moved. Everything, there's a prophecy. Everything in the end times that they tell you is right will be wrong.
Yes.
Do you think there might be a reason behind that? The study today is going to be in regards to Paul bringing the Greeks into the temple. I'm Yahweh's name witness, Teacher Ray Bunzow. You can contact me at P.O. Box 143, Roscommon, that's spelled R-O-S-C-O-M-M-O-N, Michigan, 48653 is the zip code. Today is Tammuz the 28th. 2 days from the next month here, and we're still in only the fourth sacred month of this year of 7513, since Adam was promised the redemption for the original sin. You know the original sin, the pear on the ground? Not the apple or the fig or some other actual tangible fruit you'd devour. See, stop and remember, in reality, Yahweh God is just. If Eve had eaten physical fruit off a tree or a vine, why didn't her teeth rot?
Yes.
So, see, everybody wants to say, I believe the Bible. I believe in the Bible. But do you really believe what it says? And how do you really know what it says? See, you've got the Hebrew, the Chaldean, Aramaic for the Old Covenant. Excuse me here. And then you've got the Greek for the New Covenant, known as the New Testament. So who invited the Greeks into the temple?
That's right.
It wasn't Paul. And we're going to read that here shortly. But we're going to have to set up a few things before we read that about Paul and Acts. We're going to Acts 21 next. But just remember, what's said in the Hebrew, in the Aramaic, and the Chaldee cannot be doctored or altered because the documents are too old. But the Greek manuscripts the Greek Textus Receptus, the Greek, what do they call that? Criticism, has all been brought forth. And that's enough setup. Let's just get into this because I've got a lot of transparencies today. Numbers chapter 1 verse 51. Remember, when Yahweh God gave a law, there's two sides to that law. Not only is it a law, it's a royal edict. Comes from the King of Kings and the King of Lords. Not off the pen of a scribe or just from a holy man. And see, you can believe the old covenant even though it wasn't given in blood. But it was given through the holy men. And as Moses set down this law in Numbers chapter 1 verse 51, and when the tabernacle sets forward, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is pitched, the Levites shall set it up. The Levites are in charge of all the instructions, all the service to the temple for the people, the ecclesia, the church. We, the people, are the church. Numbers 51b here. And the stranger, the Nachri, the Enosh, those not of Israel, that cometh close, shall be put to death. Now let's get another second witness on that and flip the page here and go to Numbers chapter 3, verse 10. And thou shalt, Moses is speaking, or Yahweh speaking to Moses, and thou shalt appoint Aaron and Aaron's sons, and they shall wait on their priest's office, and the stranger, the Nachri, the Enosh, those not of the lineage of Israel, the chosen lineage of the Hebrew people that have been separated from the Hebrew people as the chosen people, the Israelites. Anyone not of the Israelite descendancy that cometh near shall be put to death near to the tabernacle. One more here. Numbers 3:38. But those that encamp before the tabernacle toward the east, even before the tabernacle of the congregation, eastward shall be Moses and Aaron and Aaron's sons, keeping the charge of the sanctuary for the charge of the children of Israel. Now this doesn't say that the children of the Asians or the Africans or the South Americans or the Eskimos or the Pupans.
That's right.
The children of the man called Israel. And any of those that are not from the children of the man called Israel that come near shall be put to death. That's simple. But what's happened to today's society? Let's go over, and we're going to follow this up. Now that's the law. Now I had to set this up because Paul speaks of this in his discourse in Acts chapter 21. Now as you thumb through, stop in Ezekiel, put a bookmark in Ezekiel and Obadiah, because we're going back there also. Because there has to be a little something there that enforces why Paul went to what? Gentiles. See, the implication here is that what I'm about to go through here, yes, thank you, is something that has been twisted and turned for somebody's advantage. Now at this point we're going to stop and go into the Encyclopedia of Biblical, Theological, and Eschatological Literature, please, for the date, by Reverend McClintock, James Strong, printed in New York in 1888, which means that when this came from Europe, this predates 1888. Next, please. This is what's been perpetrated on Judeo-Christianity. Oriental philosophy is an ancient system seeking to explain the nature and origin of all things by the principle of emanation from the eternal fountain of being. Eternal fountain. All right, they want you to turn over to Magi here. Those who profess to believe the Oriental philosophy were divided into three leading sects, groups, and were subdivided into others. Some imagine two eternal principles from whence all things proceed, one presiding over the light and the other over the physical. Well, here's where they get the Father and the Son. And by their perpetual conflict explaining the mixture of good and evil that appears in the universe. Others maintain that the being which presided over matter was not an eternal principle, but a subordinate intelligence. They suppose that this being was moved by a sudden impulse to reduce to order the rude mass of matter, which lay excluded from the mansions of the deity. See, they don't even use a subtitle here, other than deity, this pronoun. And at last, to create the human race, which is different from the human race, and that's a whole topic for another day. The third sect entertained a thought, an idea, a concept, to triumvirate of beings in which the supreme deity was distinguished both from the material evil principle and from the creator of the subliminary world, from the blendings of doctrine of Oriental philosophy with, now see here, this comes from an old book, from blending the doctrines of the Oriental philosophy with Christianity, the Gnostic sects, which were so numerous in the first centuries, the Gnostics, so numerous in the first centuries, derive their origin. Other sects arose which amid to unite Judaism with Christianity.
That's right.
Many of the pagan philosophers who were converted to Christianity religion exerted all their art and ingenuity. Now their art, would that be angels with wings? And ingenuity to accommodate the doctrine of the gospel bring the gospel to their own schemes of philosophy. In each age of the church, new, not the same old way, the standard, the narrow road. In each age of the church, building, group, organization, new systems were introduced, were developed, introduced, were brought into being, till in process of time we find the Christian world divided into that variety of heretical sentiment which is exhibited under the various articles in the encyclopedia. Just wait. Now let's go and read about Paul. Now we're going to do an honorable mention here in Acts 21, and we're going to read verses 17 and 18 to set up the difference between what Rome says and what the book says. Acts 21:18. And the day following Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. Now look at here. This does not say the church fathers. This is the elders, the deacons, i.e. deacons per se, the leaders of the Israelites of the man called Israel. the children of Jacob, the elders, not the church fathers. Two different sets of people. And we're going to work our way into that today. All right. Acts chapter 21, 26. We're going to start right here at 26. This is where Paul took 4 men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until that an offering. Now, this offering is a topic for a whole other discussion, and I could spend the rest of my time here today on this offering. Should be offered for every one of them. And when the 7 days were almost ended, now watch this. The Jews, which were of Asia Minor, when they saw him, Paul, in the temple, the Jews from Asia Minor, stirred up the people and grabbed Paul, crying out, "Men of Israel!" Now notice, 2 different races of people here. You've got all the mongrels called Jews. In Judea, at that time, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Edomites, the Girgasites, they all became citizens of Judea called Jews, because they were not the men of the race of the man called Israel, as it states here. And we're going to show that from a commentary momentarily. Next please. Crying out, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teaches all men everywhere against the people and the law and this place, and further brought Greek into the temple." Excuse me, "and hath polluted this holy place." For your better understanding, the parentheses here that were not included in the original text say, "For they had been seen before with them." The Jews here that came from Asia Minor. "For they had seen before with him in the city of Ephesion, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. And all the city was moved, and all the people, all the men from Israel, ran together and took Paul and drew him out of the temple. And forthwith the doors were shut and locked. And as they went about to dismember, kill Paul, tidings came unto the chief captain of the band that was all Jerusalem was in an uproar, who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating of Paul. And the chief captain came near and took Paul and commanded to be bound with 2 chains, and demanded who he was and what he had done. Now let's look at this explanation. This is a commentary Bible, the Holy Bible, containing Old and New Testament according to the Authorized Version, please for the date, with copious marginal references by Thomas Scott. He's the rector of Aston Sandford, Bucks, in the British Islands. And there's a concordance in here by Reverend John Brown of Haddington. This is volume 3, which would be the New Covenant. But now this was printed in New York in 1843, which were when it came from Scotland. That's a little bit older than that. Next please. Now, here we go. Verse 27. As the apostle could not enter on his purification until the 3rd day after his arrival at Jerusalem, and as Paul made his defense before Felix, seems to have been 7 or 8 days after he apprehended in the temple, only 12 days after he arrived in Jerusalem. The first cause should be certainly rendered. When the 7 days were about to be accomplished, that is, the 7 days which had been fixed on and mentioned to the priest, the Edomite priest, as the term at the end of which the sacrifices would be offered and the vow performed. At this time, some Jews from Asia Minor, who had known Paul when he taught there, saw Paul in the inner court of the temple, whether he went to the priests about the sacrifice to be offered, and being actuated by furious and bigoted zeal of Jews, they excited a riot and seized Paul as a profaner of the sacred place, calling earnestly on all true Israelites. Now look at, if these Jews were not true Israelites, why does the commentator bring this true Israelites to mention? Now stop. Put in your thinking here that before the Second World War, writing was an art. Look at the books of Ayn Rand, how she is so descriptive with words, and you can just imagine all the things that she writes about. Now you go back here into the 1800s, and this man is explaining for the understanding of the students in the theological cemeteries of that day that there is a separation between the Jews and the real men of the land called Israel. They don't use just 3, 4, maybe 5-letter words to explain the idea behind a principle. Called earnestly on all the true Israelites to assist the Jews in this cause in which their religion and national honor were at stake. Now what happened to our national honor today? And what's at stake with our nationality here in these once great United States? For this was the very man who had everywhere taught men to disregard their title to be taught men to disregard their title to be the particular people of Yahweh God, to violate. What does this mean now? You mean there is only a small group that are a particular people?
Peculiar.
Peculiar, thank you. To violate the law Moses was given, to abrogate and despise the temple as about to be destroyed, and to show his contempt and enmity, the more they averred. Now that's a word you don't get in school very often. You're going to have to look that one up. Averred. That he had brought uncircumcised Gentiles into the holy place to profane it. In this city were mistaken. So right here the commentator's saying it was a mistake to even think Paul brought the Gentiles into the temple. All right, let's finish this up out of the text here. Jump right over to chapter 24 here. We've got a long ways to go here today. Pick up at verse 4. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee, Felix, I pray thee that thou wouldest hear of the clemency of a few words. For we have found this man a pestilent feller, a mover of sedition among the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who hath also gone about to profane the temple. Now let's go back over here. What was his accusation over here in chapter 21? It was different from what they're telling Felix. Let's jump down here to verse 8. Commanding his accusers to come unto thee by... Wait a minute. Verse 6. Who hath also gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law, but the chief captain, Listeria, came upon us with a great violence and took him out of our hands. concerning his accusers to come unto thee, by examining of whom thyself mayest take knowledge of all these things whereof we accuse Paul. And the Jews also assented, say, these things were so. Now there's a bunch of other Jews right there in the audience before Felix, the king, the Edomite king. Then Paul, after the governor had beckoned unto Paul to speak, answered, For as much as I know that thou hast been for many years a judge unto this nation, I do the more cheerfully answer for myself, because that thou mayest understand that there are yet 12 days since I came up to Jerusalem for to worship. And they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, neither in the synagogues in the city, raising up the people. So Paul, he stayed secluded until his time of purification was over, to release him from this Nazirite vow. But I confess unto thee, Felix, that after the way which they, Jews, call heresy, or the resurrection they call heresy, so worship I the God of my fathers, not the Son of God, the God of my fathers, believing all things that were written in the law and in the prophets. So the law that I read today, anybody that is not from the children of Israel that go into the temple, die. But if a man from Israel takes a Greek into the temple, he dies with the Greek. Verse 16. And herein do I exercise myself to have always conscience void of offense towards Yahweh God and toward men. Now after many years I have come to bring alms to my nation and offerings, whereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with a multitude nor with tumult. Those should have been here before you, Felix, and object if they had anything against me. So those that started the rumor that Paul brought a Greek in the temple weren't even there. They didn't show up. Next, please. Now, we're going to get a little thing out of the Companion Bible. Next, please. The Companion Bible was put together by Bullinger, who was a student and worked with James Strong, the guy that put the concordance together. And we're going to talk about the Greek text here. Because, see, Paul never brought a Greek into the temple. Paul never brought an Asia Minor Greek into the temple. In the introduction, while modern critics are occupied with the problems as to the origin of the four Gospels and with their so-called discrepancies, we believe that Matthew, Mark, and John got the respective Gospels, where Luke got his Gospel from above, and that the discrepancies, so-called, are the creation of the creation of the commentators and the harmonist. Now the harmonist, isn't that interesting? The latter, the harmonist, particularly for when they see two similar events, they immediately assume they are identical, and when they read similar discourses of Emmanuel, they at once assume that they are discordant accounts of the same, instead of seeing that they are repetitions made at different times under different circumstances with different antecedents and consequence, which necessitate the employment of words and expressions so as to accord the several occasions. See how they can use words and expressions to bring about a different occasion. These differences thus became proofs of the accuracy and the purification. Oh, please. in respect with the living word, is like the written word, for if the claims of Emmanuel to be God were not true, he could not have even been a good man. As to those claims, man can believe them or leave them. In the former case, he goes with the word of Yahweh God and is overwhelmed with the evidence of his truth. In the latter case, he abandons divine revelations for man's imaginations. The inspiration in divine revelation, the holy men spoke for Yahweh as they were moved. The wind, as it bore along many of the trees, caused each tree to give forth its own particular sound, so that the experienced ear of a woodman could tell, even in the dark, the name, next please, of that particular tree under which he was standing, so to distinguish the creaking elm from the rustling aspen. Even so, while each holy man of Yahweh is moved by one Spirit, that's the one Spirit that sits on the throne, the Holy Spirit, the individuality of the inspired writer is preserved. That's why we may explain the medical works of Luke and the beloved physician used in the Gospel and in the Acts of the Apostles. Up, please. The language with regard to this is generally assumed that because it comes to us in the Greek, the New Testament ought to be in classic Greek as in the condemned, because it is not. Classic Greek was its prime some centuries before, and in the time of Emmanuel, there were several reasons why the New Testament, the New Covenant, was written in classical Greek. The writers were Hebrews, and thus, while the language is Greek, the thoughts and the idioms are Hebrew. The idioms are Hebraisms, are generally pointed out in the notes of the companion Bible. If the Greek of the New Covenant be regarded as an inspired translation from Hebrew or Aramaic originals, most of the various readings would be accompanied for an understanding. Next, please. We're just going to go right through these. Then when we have to remember that in the time of our Lord, of Emmanuel, there were no less than 4 languages in use in Palestine, Judea, and that area of the Mideast. And the mixtures were formed the Yiddish of those days. Those languages were Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Aramaic. Interesting, they don't teach that anymore. Doubtless, Emmanuel spoke all these languages. In the synagogue, he would necessarily use Hebrew. To Pilate, he would answer in Latin. While the common people, the farmers, the Israelites, he would doubtlessly speak Aramaic.
That's right.
Aramaic was Hebrew, as it was developed during and after the captivity of Babylon. There were 2 branches known roughly as Eastern, which is Chaldee, and Western Mesopotamia or Palestinian. This latter was known also as Syriac, and the Greeks used Syrian as an abbreviation for Assyria. This was perpetuated by the early Christians, the early men of Israel. Syriac flourished till the 7th century A.D., and the 8th and 9th century it was overtaken by Arabic. And the 13th century it disappeared. We have already noted that certain parts of the Old Covenant were written in Chaldean or Eastern Aramaic. Aramaic is of 3 kinds: Jerusalem Aramaic, Sumerian, and Galilean. Please. Of these, Jerusalem Aramaic might be compared with High German, Interesting.
Yes.
The children of Judah must have moved into Germany. And the other two with Low German. There are many Aramaic words preserved in the Greek of the New Covenant, and most of the commentators call attention to a few of them, but from these books cited below, there are... Next, please. We're still in Appendix 94 of the Companion Bible. With the use of pawn tickets, charms, litanies, tales, magical literature, and every sort of literary production. These are the inestimable value in enabling us to arrive at the true meaning of many words used in the time of Christ, Emmanuel, which were heretofore inexplainable. Now in the manuscripts, isn't it interesting that they would use all kinds of little litanies, magical literature, witchcraft? To understand the manuscripts of the Greek New Testament dating from the 4th century AD are more in number than those of any Greek or Roman author, for these latter are rare and none are really ancient. The study of these from a literary point of view has been called the textual criticism, and is necessarily proceeds together on documentary evidence, while modern criticism introduces the element of human opinion and hypothesis. Man has never made a proper use of Yahweh's gifts. Yahweh gave men the sun, the moon, and the stars for signs, and for seasons to give the day and the night. The worst part is that of this, that man charges Yahweh God with the result and throws the blame on Yahweh for all the confusion due to Yahweh's own want of care. Now this falls right back into who's obedient and who wants to walk the narrow road. Next, please. Oh, hold on a second. Right there, the bottom line. Right there, the bottom line. Bullinger says, now, the manuscripts of the Greek Testament are to be studied today with what? Just casual appearance?
No.
The utmost of care. Next, please. The modern critics are agreed that the last 12 verses, oh, we don't want that part. But now we're over to Appendix 168. We came over here to get the versions. The versions of the New Testament come to us in the Syriac. The oldest Syriac in the various forms is the Peshto. P-E-S-H-I-T-T-O. Now look at right here. We have a book. It's right here, another book. Isn't it interesting what you can get out of a book? The New Covenant, Aramaic Peshto text with Hebrew translations. Now what does it say? New Testament along here? No, it says New Covenant from the Aramaic. If this book's available for the Aramaic, why do we let the Greeks in the temple? Paul didn't bring the Greeks into the temple. It was the Roman Catholic Church.
That's right.
Next, please. Now today we're here, the Fathers. Whatever may be their value as to doctrine and imperfection, interpretation, yet in determining actual words or their form or sequence, their Fathers, their evidence may, by an illusion as to whether a verse or verses existed or not in their day, is more valuable than even manuscripts or versions. Alright, now down here today, this is a list of the church fathers. Papias, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Hippolytus, Vincentius, Acta Philita, Euspius. Who is Euspius? Remember Euspius? Which Euspius? Aphrodites, please. Ambrose, Christone, Jerome, and Augustine. Next, please. Now we're going to study just a little bit of history on these men. These are the church fathers. These are the church fathers that brought you the Greek Textus Receptus through their own finagling, through their own Hellenistic thoughts and ideas. Well, first we're going to talk about Paul. When Paul and Silas left Thessalonica, they came to Berea. They found the Jews more notable. Now see, here we go again. The Jews. Now, the Jews more noblemen, this word right here in the Greek means noblemen. This is the men of Israel. You have to be careful. You have to really think into it, because this word Jew is miscued and misinterpreted, misplaced many times. Just remember, they even called Paul a Jew. But he couldn't be a Jew if he was from the tribe of Benjamin. That's right. Even if Judah was called Jews, which they weren't, because Jew is the term for the mongrelization. Paul couldn't be a Jew. Peter couldn't be a Jew. James couldn't be a Jew. They were all Benjamites.
Paul couldn't be a Roman citizen.
Let's see. When Paul and Silas left Thessalonica, they came to Berea. Here they found the Israelites more noble. We'll just call them the people more noble. More disposed to receive the news of the rejected and crucified Messiah and to examine the Scriptures with candor than those at Thessalonica. Let's jump right down. Some of the brethren went with Paul, probably this is when Paul's leaving, as far as Athens, where they left Paul, carrying back a request to Silas and Timothy that they would speedily join Paul. He apparently did not like to teach alone and intended to rest for his apostolic labor until they should rejoin him. But how could he refrain with all that was going on at Athens around him? There, Paul witnessed the most profuse idolatry side by side with all the most pretentious philosophy. Either of these would have been enough to stimulate his spirit. To idolaters and philosophers, he felt equally urged to proclaim Yahweh as the living King. So he went to his own countrymen. Now here we go again, back to the men of Israel. And to the proselytes in the synagogue, and declared to them that the Messiah had arrived, but he also spoke like another Socrates with the people in the market and with the followers of the two great schools of philosophy, Epicureans and Stoics. But here we go, Paul's going to his countrymen and to the proselytes, which would be mixed in with the countrymen, in the location of the church synagogue building, please. The philosophers encountered Paul with a mixture of curiosity and contempt, the Epicurean teaching himself to seek for tranquil enjoyment as the chief object of life. Heard one claiming to be the Lord of men, who had shown them the glory of dying to himself and promised to those who fought the good fight bravely and nobler bliss than the comforts of life could yield. The Stoic, cultivating a stern, isolated moral independence, heard of one whose own righteousness was proved by submission to the Father in heaven. Next, please. See, Paul had to go and talk to everybody so he could weed out the lost sheep of the house of Israel from everybody else. Paul's third ministry route. Let's bring it up a little bit here, because we're going to get right over here. Now, right down here, we've got a city called Alexandria. And right over here, we've got the land of Edom, Esau, otherwise in Paul's day known as Idumea. And up along here, we've got different towns in Antioch. Oh, look at right here. We've got another town right here called Alexandria. Same as this town down in Egypt. Now, when they talk about Alexandria, you're going to wonder where they're talking about. And then we've got Deborah down just a little bit, please. And Lystra. And Bithynia. And we come over here, and the coastline right here of this sea, you've got Thessalonica. And right up north here is the town of where the Bereans were, the area of the Bereans. Just to give you an idea of where Paul traveled around through Thrace. Pergamos, right over here. This is where Satan lives. Remember over there in Revelation, I think it's chapter 2, Pergamos, where Satan lives. And those that call themselves of Judea, but are not of Judea.
Right.
All right, next please. Let's talk a little bit about the old guy. This is not the guy that started the perpetration of the Greek, but he's the guy who kicked it along almost the hardest, was Origen. Because he was born in the mountain region to which his parents had retired to escape persecution, also surnamed Adamantius, on account of his remarkable firmness and iron austerity, is called the father of biblical criticism and church exegesis in the church. So here's the biblical father. Origen may well be pronounced one of the best and worthiest of the church fathers. Indeed, one of the greatest moral prodigies of the human race. He is universally regarded. Here we go. Everybody's included. Origen is universally regarded as one of the most laborious and learned scholars that has appeared in Christendom. And although his orthodoxy has on some important doctrinal points been called into question, his fame and influence will be endured to the end of time, and his memory be revered among all the followers of Isis the Christos. The life of Origen, he was born according to the most trustworthy computation at the city of Alexandria, here we go, in Egypt, 185 AD. His father, who was a Christian, was reputed to have been a man of culture and complicity while he sought to imbue the mind of this youth, whose first instructed he was. Origen's father was the first instructor with love of the letters and science, which every free Greek was to be conversant with. He yet paid particular attention to the sacred knowledge so that Origen might truly understand the contents of the scriptures, but he was basically taught letters and sciences that every Greek honored. Next, please. So, it says, Origen's a Greek. And his doctrine. The universal church was split into two parties, and these parties fought furiously for and against Origen, as if the Christian religion had itself been at stake. Next, please. See, Origen, the men of Israel said, no, there's not three in one. But the Greeks said, oh, there has to be. There has to be a guy upstairs, and there has to be a guy walking down around here that you hung on the cross, the stake. Now let's go to Irenaeus. Of the personal history of Irenaeus, especially in his youth, but little is known. The date of his birth was about 120 to 140 AD. Most of the the latest students of the church fathers, here Irenaeus is a church father now, not an elder, include we put together between 120 and 100. The place of his birth also is not definitely known. It is probable, however, from his very early acquaintance with Polycarp, the illustrious bishop of Samaria, of which he himself tells us. He was born somewhere in Asia Minor, and some have assigned the city of Samaria upward. So, Irenaeus was born in Asia Minor. Irenaeus was a leading representative of the Asiatic Joannian school in the second half of the 2nd century, the champion of the Catholic orthodoxy against Gnostic heresy, and a mediator between the Eastern and the Western churches. He united a learned Greek education. He brought them together, a learned Greek education and philosophical penetration with practical. How can you bring together education and philosophical principles with practical wisdom and moderation? Unless you've got some earthly scheme or plan or something other. Because if you bring education and philosophy together, that's not the narrow way.
Compromise.
We plainly trace with Irenaeus the influence of the Spirit of John. The true way to Yahweh, says he, is in opposition to the false Gnostic, is love. See, here we go again. Gnosticism, it's all right. There's no salt. There's no salt. Next, please.
All love, just like today.
Here we go. We're just going to stay on this one a second. Hippolytus, the name of several saints and martyrs in the early church, especially that celebrated one of the fathers of the church who probably lived in the early part of the 3rd century. Thus, the oldest ecclesiastical writers who make any mention of Hippolytus, Eusebius, and Jerome give him the title of bishop without stating what see the latter was even seen in. Now, please. His mastery of the Greek language would render him particularly fit to be a bishop of the nations, who frequented the harbor of Rome in multitudes. In spite of Jacobi's assertion to the contrary, there seemed to be no reason why he should not at the same time have been a presbyter and head of the party of Rome. We know further that Hippolytus was a disciple of Irenaeus that used common negotiation to bring Hellenistic theories into the Greek language. Next, please. And the Greek language came right into the church. Now here's Eusebius. We're going to talk about Eusebius here for just a minute. Which Eusebius do you think it is? How many different Eusebiuses do you believe there are? Now think about this. Eusebius sat at the right hand of Constantine in the Council of Nicaea, and Constantine sat on a gold chair. He didn't have his throne there, but they had him a gold chair. Now Eusebians, a name given to the Arius from the Eusebius of Nicodema. So I should have showed you Nicodema on the map, I forgot. So here's Eusebius of Nicodema, who may be called the leader of, if not the organizer of the Arian party in the 4th century. 4th century, 324. Was a distant relative to the Emperor Julian and was born about 324. He was first bishop of Veritas of Phoenicia, but got himself translated to Nicodemus. After the excommunication of Arius by Alexander, Bishop of Alexandria of Egypt, Eusebius took Arius. Arius had written a letter asking for aid and help, protection. Eusebius took Arius under his protection and offered him the asylum of his own home. Up, please. Now that's Nicodemus. Now here's Eusebius of Laodicea, a native of Alexandria, and therefore sometimes called Eusebius of Alexandria, a deacon of Alexandria. He accompanied his bishop. And now see down here, that's the Eusebius of Laodicea, 257, 260 to 263. This is in the 3rd century. But he's still around the time of the Nicene Council, another 60 or 70 years later. Eusebius, Bishop of Emesa, in the 4th and the 300s. 300 doesn't say. Socrates gives the following account of him, who this person was. George, Bishop of Laodicea, who was present on this occasion, informs us, for he says in the book which he has composed on this life, that he was descended from the noble family of Edessa in Mesopotamia, and that from the child of the Holy Scriptures, that he was afterwards instructed in Greek literature by the master resident at Edessa. And finally, that the sacred books were expounded to him by Patrophilius and Eusebius. Now here's Eusebius down here, and here's Eusebius up here, which means a different person, because if Patrophilius and Eusebius taught Eusebius, the latter of whom presided over the church of Caesarea, and the former at Scythopolis. So, all these Greek individuals that had writings and something to do with the Greek Textus Receptus, when there's available the Aramaic fresh stuff. Now let's go back in here and see. I asked you to mark Amos. Oh, it was Obadiah. Put a bookmarker in Obadiah, which will take us to Amos chapter 9, where from the Old Covenant we have to find out whom Paul was sent to. Amos 9, verse 11. In that day I will raise up the tabernacle of David that is fallen. See? The tabernacle of Judea has crumbled. That doesn't mean the building. That's on a racial, national basis. Has fallen. In that day I will raise up the people of David that is fallen, and close up the breaches thereof, and I will raise up the ruins, and I will build it in the day as in the days of old, that they may possess the remnants of Eden, and of all the heathen which are called by my name, saith Yahweh. Now stop and think. There is only one group, nationality, that has been cut out of a nationality and set aside as the particular, the peculiar, the elect, the ecclesia, the chosen people. Over in Amos 3. Only Israel have I loved. Go back over here to Ezekiel chapter 9. Only Israel have I loved of all the nations. Verse 2, Ezekiel 9:2. And behold, 6 men came from the way of the higher gate, which lieth toward the north, and every man a slaughter weapon in his hand, a sword or some tool of war. And one man among them was clothed with linen, with a writer's inkhorn by his side. And they went in and stood before the brazen altar. And the glory of Yahweh of Israel was gone up from the cherub whereupon he was, to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed with the linen, and he said, which had the writer's incord by his side. And Yahweh said unto the man with the incord, Go forth through the midst of the city, in the midst of the people of Jerusalem, and set a mark on their foreheads of the men that sigh and cry for all the abominations done to their people. That there is a prophecy for those in the latter day who understand, have this different understanding, and weep in their heart over what's happened to the white Western European nations. Not just the once great United States, but all the Western nations. And even a few little islands in the Pacific, Australia, New Holland, in different places. These are the lost sheep of the house of Israel, as the prophecy says in Matthew 1:21, where Emmanuel will save his people. So, Paul didn't bring the people into the temple. The white Western European people have been Jewed into thinking they're God's chosen people. In this small lecture today on the Greeks in the temple, that were not let in by Paul, but were let in by popular demand of the Hellenistic Greek Gnostic thinkers in Rome, in the Roman kingdom, that overwhelmed through various other things, which is several other topics for other days. I'm Yahweh's Witness, Teacher Ray Bunzow. Today's Tammuz 28, the year 7513 since Adam's sin. May Yahweh bless you into this message.